Hello and welcome. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the videos. In today's video, what is the absolute dumbest backstory you've ever heard from a character? Something that's so nonsensical and batshit that it either made you laugh or cry. I'll go first. The most ridiculous backstory I came across is from a Gloomstalker Conclave ranger named Delilah. Apparently, Delilah had this nice hobby of taking night poops in the woods in the dead of night, calling it a peaceful and serene experience. But when she kept getting nearly mauled by panthers every time she went out at night, she was all like, well, I guess I better learn magic that lets me take my night poops in peace, which lead her to take a 2-year-long journey to find a Gloomstalker Conclave and teach her their ways. I put out an ad for a game looking for 4 level 1 players, only official sources allowed. A guy applied with a level 20 homebrew race. He was literally Bahamut that could change any dice roll to a natural 20 at will, then gave me a 20-page backstory that was basically, he was involved in every major event in history, and a final paragraph about how his character is guarding over the other PCs, so it should make perfect sense why a level 20 PC is traveling with a bunch of level 1s, so I have to accept him. Fellow DM missed a session and asked if I would stand in for him, knowing I knew Curse of Strahd inside out. While filling in for him, a player asks to have a sidebar where he goes over his backstory that the DM hadn't touched on, and he was wondering if it might be relevant given where they currently are. He explains how his character is a god from another material plane and he's just traveling the planes masquerading as a mortal for fun. More than that, he created the material plane he was from and is more powerful than any other deity. He wanted to display his godly powers by just straight up destroying the vestiges in the Amber Temple. I told him I wasn't really comfortable handling such a situation as just the substitute DM. He was, surprisingly cool with that. It was a weird session. I had a sorcerer who got kicked by a donkey, flew into the air, and then through a Feywild portal in a tree. I'm a multi-class paladin, warlock, and I play my god and patron against one another because I'm smarter than both of them. Okay, roll 2 deception checks. You fail both. You're now in 1v2 combat versus a god and an otherworldly horror, and you have no class abilities or spells as they've been stripped from you. Roll initiative. Character wanted to start with the Book of Vile Darkness and planned to kill all of the gods in the universe in creating his own dark universe. He also had no attachments to anything and despised everyone in his life equally. They were level 1. I shot that one down quickly. Okay. From a homebrew superhero RPG intended to be absurd, one of the characters had been struck by lightning while watching a Godzilla movie and had all the powers of Godzilla. But it was a crappy little 12 inches black and white TV, so his Godzilla form was 1 foot tall. I once DM'd for a new group of first-time players, all of which came up with pretty straightforward backstories except for one. They elected to make a dragonborn cleric named Humpa Thumpa, named after their favorite things, humping and thumping, who was raised by snakes and believed they were a snake until they got surprised by an attractive woman and stood up, realizing they had legs the entire time. They then became a cleric of thighs, who dedicated themselves to worshipping thighs. No idea how these totally incongruent things were supposed to work together. They didn't make it past session 0. Abdul Thundercock the Minotaur was born fully grown, immediately obliterating his mother. Grief-stricken, he now searches the world to find out why his birth was so odd. I had a player take the pirate background and say he was a land pirate. His dad was a pirate and he was raised to be one but refused to go out on the water and became an adventurer. I think he had an open water phobia. I have my own gothic horror setting I created a few years back. After giving them all the info about it, all of the players turned up with something on brand: a blood hunter lycanthrope, a righteous cleric looking to tip the scales on the side of good, a mad scientist artificer searching for the key to reanimations, and this one dude literally turned up with a cowboy who was plunged through a wormhole and is now not only in the wrong dimension, but the wrong time as well, and is trying to quantum leap his way back. Hexblade, whose weapon had a long convoluted backstory about how many generations it's been passed down and how many dragons, gods, and other powerful creatures it had killed. The actual character who would be using the sword was basically I dunno, character who was the god of war. Naturally, as the god of war, he enjoyed fighting. But because he was a god, it also made fighting completely boring, being both immortal and super op. So he hatched a plan to remove his power and make himself mortal, essentially turning himself into an average human, so he could experience the thrill of combat again. Actually made for a pretty fun character. When the cleric communed with his god, the ex-god of war would jump in and join the conversation because he was friends with both of them. My very good friend, who is a smartass and thinks he is clever, but I can read him like an open book, did essentially this. His expected free bonuses will be in the brackets: super renowned pirate, expected free intimidation or fear in enemies, got screwed over by a curse and lost all of it, owned his own legendary ship and crew in the past, expected to have an unbeatable legendary magical ship once backstory finished, secretly died but his sheer will brought him back to get his stolen shit back, either expected to be a revenant or straight up self-resurrection. And as usual, my question to this is, okay, and all of this is a level 1 rogue? You're insane. I trolled one DM by writing, for a level 1 character, about 4 pages of amazing heroic exploits. Dragons slain. Maidens rescued. Treasures looted. And then the last paragraph was basically, my character is that dude's brother, and is real sick of his mom asking why he can't be a hero like his brother. That is an amazing backstory. I can imagine so many possible character traits for him. He also has great bonds and is tied into the world. I've had a couple of surprise one-shots before, and have as a result had some very silly backstories. My absolute favorite though, is Mistress Smole. Mistress Smole was a normal halfling arcane trickster, but she eventually discovered a teacher who was willing to teach her the ancient art of rune scribes. She got all the way to Rogue 5 Rune Scribe 5 before she was betrayed by her former teacher, now paranoid that she'd become a better scribe than he was. He used an ancient pact to strip her of knowledge and power, the equivalent of losing 5 levels. But she happened to lose the 5 levels of rogue she had, leaving her as a pure rune scribe who still met the requirements to take the class because she was level 5. The one shot was completely insane, and she was just the icing of the proverbial cake, but it's still the dumbest backstory I've seen in a game thus far. I've forgotten some of the details, but in a superhero game a friend of mine's character was at a NASCAR race and something happened the part one forgot, and all the people in the crowd were magically fused into one super redneck. He also had an adamantium chainsaw on a chain. Playing with a shepherd druid that abandoned elven society to be an agricultural hermit, cultivating and farming his own corn in a clearing in the woods, far from any society. He eventually found that the soil was tainted in some way, making the crop hallucinogenic in nature. Now he's fully addicted to the psychoactive corn and went totally insane in his seclusion, speaking with a newfound southern twang he previously didn't have. In his insanity, he had a revelation that to help preserve the balance of nature, he could send recently passed animals off to their respective afterlives peacefully by having sex with their corpses. Now he dutifully keeps a list of all the animal corpses he's sent off, and it's pretty much a religious practice in his dumbass mind. His name is Crumb Dumply. Not dumb, but weirdest and most amusing. Cabbage the garden gnome. He was a gardener who tended the town's hedges, but kept getting attacked by roving monsters. He learned to fight them off with his giant shears and eventually swore an oath of the ancients and became a paladin. Looked every bit the stereotypical garden gnome, with long white beard and red cap. This ended up being weirdly appropriate, since the party's first mission was to stop a bunch of blights attacking a town. Mine is a rogue who used to be a farmer. His stats are sub 60 with a 14 in dex. The backstory was that one drunken day when his farm had a bad harvest he stumbled and fell on his head. When he woke up he had no memory of being a farmer and thought he was a super spy that the bard was talking about. Now he is in search of the command center to learn his next mission. Somehow he still is alive with 18 health at level 5. I cannot even remember all the details, because this story was so pointlessly convoluted that it was almost a parody. Except the player took it seriously. Character was a multi-class paladin hexblade. She originated in our real world, in Cuba during the mid-1700s, so knew and used flintlock pistols. Pistols did not exist in this campaign world, so she had to convince the DM that she could craft ammo somehow. She originally operated in Cuba as a pirate who was also a devout Christian minister. She was somehow cursed and sent to our campaign's D&D world where Christianity doesn't exist, so she was angry at Christianity failing her and railed against the false promise of Christ because he never existed in this world. Also, she was somehow connected to the D&D campaign world's versions of Romani. Gypsy is the more familiar, but derogatory term, people who travel in caravans. Somehow, even though she was transported to an alternate universe, she still had this connection. Also, she was the aunt of one of the other player's characters, who was not from real-world Cuba. I cannot remember how this made sense, and there was further backstory of her niece growing up abused by her parents? Some of this is creative and could be interesting, but there was far more to this confusing backstory. And thing is, no one in D&D world knew about Christ or Christianity, so it had no bearing on the world.